Who were you before you lost your wild self?
That's what we're helping you explore on the Tend Her Wild podcast.
Through questions and tools around how best to listen to your inner voice,
rewild ourselves, and live the most authentic life where we thrive instead of survive.
I'm Betsy.
And I'm Kate.
And we're so glad you've joined us for this episode.
Hello, Tend Her Wild podcast listeners. In today's episode, we are interviewing a very special guest that we are thrilled to have, Stefanie Munsterman. Stefanie is an adjunct professor at Mount Mercy University in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where she teaches in the MBA and MSL graduate programs. She's also the founder of the Spark Movement, a company dedicated to empowering women through mindfulness, coaching, and meditation, supporting them in building resilience, confidence, and personal growth. Previously, Stefanie served as the executive director of the Cedar Rapids Civil Rights Commission and worked as a civil rights investigator and mediator, consistently advocating for equality and justice. I think that really sums you up. You're deeply passionate about equity and human rights, believing that building community of belonging is both an individual and collective responsibility. She actively advances this vision through her professional and volunteer roles, serving on multiple boards and advisory councils, including the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, the Iowa Advisory Board, Iowa Public Radio Sounding Board, East Central Iowa Local Workforce Development Board, ACLU of Iowa. When do you have any free time? College Community School District, Equity Advisory Council, the North Liberty Library. I saw that one recently.
I'm very excited about that one.
Board of Trustees and the Cedar Rapids Metro Economic Alliance Innovation Council. She also volunteers as a sexual assault advocate for Riverview Center. That's amazing. For her service to the community, Stefanie's been honored with several awards. And I always like reading these because, you know, it's a big deal.
Dang, these are big deals. Yeah.
Most notably, Woman of Influence by the Corridor Business Journal. She received the Woman of the Year Award from the Women's Equality Coalition of Lynn County. She was recognized as a 40 under 40 honoree by the CBJ.
Many years ago.
I know. And received the Outstanding Service Award from the Girl Scouts of Eastern Iowa and Western Illinois. You've also been awarded by Mount Mercy College, the ACLU of Iowa, and the Spirit of ADA Award with the Great Plains ADA Center. You're from Kansas City, Missouri, and your education includes a Master's of Business Administration, Strategic Leadership, and a Bachelor of Science in Psychology. That's probably why we're already
I was going to say, I feel like you and her have a very similar background.
Yes.
Wow.
We do.
Love it.
From Missouri Western State. You love spending time with your children, Alexandria, 31, and Jules, 19, and your partner, Kevin, your dog, Roman, your cat, Jasper. And Stefanie loves being outdoors, reading, music, art, and theater, and learning new things and exploring new experiences. That is your jam.
100% my jam.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
It's truly an honor.
Yeah.
Oh,
So we have to talk about how you came forward because Kate, that you and Stefanie sat on a panel together. That's right. Is that how you first met Stefanie?
And you've been in my orbit, you know, during my previous career chapter. And I've always admired your calm voice and your thoughtful, incredibly articulate, intelligent perspective on things. And so I got to be a moderator where she was a panelist. And that was kind of one of my final acts kind of during that time and of my last job. And so when, you know, we were talking a lot about human rights at the beginning of our third season and, you know, how do we talk about this? I said, I know the person. And I sent it to you and you said,
I know that woman.
yeah.
Our children, our 19-year-old children were in the same class. And you don't know this, Stefanie, but my son, Peter, who is friends with your child, Jules, one time you came to Prairie High School and you helped them do a march for LGBTQ issues. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes,
And it was a
yes.
big deal because they sort of were skipping class and they had some support of some teachers, but I don't know if they had
Right.
support of all teachers.
Correct.
And my son Peter was part of that. He marched and he came home and he said, Mom, he's like, the woman who helped us with that, she's just like you. She reminded me of you. He's like, she would be like a friend of yours.
I love that.
And it was before I knew you well. And, you know, so anyway, you've been in both of our
That is so
orbits for a
interesting.
while.
It's the same orbits. And
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah, I love that so
I,
much.
I think it's always just timing when these things come together and we
Right.
realize, okay,
Universe tells us.
yes, it's
Yeah.
time to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so we're really thrilled to have you.
Thank you.
So we always like to start with this question about your first 10 years.
Sure.
And given this amazing biography I just wrote about or read about you, I'm really curious about your upbringing and kind of what were some early experiences or in those first 10 years that were formidable that may have laid the groundwork for some of this incredible work you've done.
Well, I have to say that anytime I'm asked to speak, I'm a little bit taken aback. Like, are you sure? Are you talking to me?
You have the right person here?
One of these days I might get over that, but today's not that day. So I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, as I said in my bio, and it was kind of a not a great part of town, so a little bit tougher. Saw a lot of injustices with some of my friends growing up, and my parents, as much as they worked really hard, we struggled quite a bit financially, and we moved around a lot. I can tell you by what age, what address it was each year from first through high school. And so I learned a lot about resilience and resourcefulness during those times because you just had to do what you needed to do, you know. And I went to a Lutheran school from first grade through high school, which I learned later that I was a scholarship kid, which I just assumed that.
Didn't even know.
No, I always thought the reason we were poor is because we had to pay for my school. It was not that case. And so I had like years of guilt of that where I was like, oh my gosh.
So you found out later, like after you were completely done and out of that school.
Yeah.
So and then you had to work with the guilt from that.
Yeah. And so later I found out, no, you're a scholarship kid. I'm like, oh, okay. But you know, going to a parochial school, and that one, you know, a lot of folks were, you know, more well off. You know, we'll come back from like Christmas vacations. They're like, yeah, we went on a tour to Europe. I'm like, I cleaned the bathroom. Is that count? But it also allowed me to do a lot of exploration and seeing things from different points of views. And so my dad worked downtown. I'm in Kansas City, and going downtown, there are a lot of individuals who are unhoused. And I saw that a lot. And Joyce always pulled at my heart. I couldn't understand it. I still don't understand it, where we live in a society where there's so much we have, and yet there's still people who
have so
without.
little.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was a big part of my life. School is honestly my refuge. I loved school so much. I still do. And it was that and the library were the two places where I felt safe. Because, you know, in my neighborhood, it wasn't always the safest. And so it was when I was at school, I was like, I'm good. And I also played sports quite a bit growing up. And that taught me quite a bit as well. But yeah, that is a lot of my basic, you know, and like many people, there's traumatic things that happened over the years that you just have to, it happened. And so now you need to work through it.
Yeah.
You know, it's, what is it I always butcher quotes. So just saying there's one where they say, you know, pain is like two arrows. The first arrow is the wound.
Yeah.
And then the second arrow is how you respond.
Yeah.
And so are you going to allow that second arrow to happen? And are you going to allow that second arrow to hit? And so when I first heard that, I was like, okay, I have responsibility for the second arrow. And that really helped a lot.
I see so many of the things you're now doing that
From
show
that
up.
childhood. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
education, teaching, and then just your civil rights work. Obviously, You felt injustice at such a young age.
I did. And it's so funny. I was talking to Jules, my 19-year-old, about this the other day about, they always ask, well, why did you get into civil rights? I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. It was always a part of me because I remember in first grade, there was some, it's weird the things you remember, but there were some girls in the class, all of their names started with a J. And so
they were Jennifer. I bet there was a Jennifer.
There's a Jennifer.
I know, you're my generation. There were lots of Jennifers.
Jennifer, Heather, Tiffany, yes. But
Sarah.
Yes, absolutely. But they created a club for girls with J names. Well, obviously my name.
You didn't have a J.
I didn't. So I started a club for everybody.
Because as a first grader.
Yes. Like, we need a club for everybody because that's not fair. So
there it was.
There spark.
There was the foundation, the root of all of this. Yeah. So when you got through college, were you already very clear in your early 20s that you wanted to work with human rights and social activism? How did it all evolve into sort of what you're doing today?
That's one of those things. When I was younger, I thought I had it laid out of I was going to go to school, I was going to be an attorney, and I wanted to be prosecuting attorney.
You guys are so much like, oh my gosh.
I want to put people away who are hurting people. And then I went to college and I took a psychology class and I was like, okay, I'm in love. I'm in absolute love with this. And then when I was 19, I became a mom. And so Allie, my 31-year-old, I can't believe she's 31. So I was a sophomore in college. And so that shifted things a little bit. And so I was frankly a senior in college for like 10 years because basically I had a big gap between my junior year and my senior year because I was a single mom, had to work several jobs to make sure she had what she needed. And then I went back, got my bachelor's in 2003. But I think just seeing just so many injustices and seeing how some of my friends were treated versus how I was treated. Some of my friends were kids of color and some of my friends had disabilities, and just seeing how they were treated by their peers, by the society in general, by the teachers, and my LGBT friends. I had a friend in college who was trans, and seeing what she went through. And this was back in 94.
This was before people were even identifying as trans.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, because the first semester, it was a different person. And then she came back and she's like, this is my name. And I said, okay, this is who you are. That was back in 94. Holy moly.
Wow. Yeah. And before there was any language around it, before there was any understanding around it. And so the fact that that also came into your orbit, and how much it was in many ways foretelling what you were passionate about in your own journey.
Right. Absolutely. So I've always just been pulled to do social justice work, even though I didn't have that language growing up. I was always that kid who was like, nope, that's not right. I may or may not have gotten in trouble quite a bit over the years for talking or asking questions.
So you did?
I asked way too many questions for a Lutheran school.
Yeah.
Just have faith.
Have faith.
Just have faith.
And pray about it.
Take our word for it.
Yes. And I'm like, so where in the Bible does it say that explicitly? And
they didn't like that.
They did not care for that. So the questions, which is funny because then I ended up being an investigator for many years. So turned my questioning into a career. But
So you from Kansas City, you came to college or finished your degree at Mount Mercy?
Actually, well, long story short, I moved up and I got my bachelor's. I took some classes at Iowa, transferred them back to Missouri Western, and then I got my master's at Mount Mercy.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you landed in a very prominent role.
Yeah.
As the head of the Human Rights Commission in Cedar Rapids. And that sounds like it really pulled together a lot of your skill set into one role.
Right.
You did it for 12 years?
12 years?
Yeah, I worked for the commission for 12 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? Because I feel like we're living in these times where human rights is kind of getting thrown out there as a term, and you are an expert in human rights, and I'd love to hear from you.
It's great.
What is
human rights?
Human rights. What does work in human rights mean?
Yeah.
In today's world?
It is not for the faint of heart. I loved it, but it was very challenging. Some people don't like you just because you work in civil rights. Some people's reactions were not the most positive, so you have to have really thick skin. What it comes down to is humanity. I mean, it sounds so simple at its core, but we just need to see each other as someone who deserves to be loved, someone who deserves to feel like they belong, someone who has value, someone whose voice needs to be heard, someone who should have power for co-agency and co-creation. And those voices are so often marginalized. And it's, that's just a wound that is with somebody for the entirety.
Yeah.
And so I actually started there in 2008 as the administrative assistant. And I was in that role for about 9 months. And I was like, hey, I want to be an investigator. So I was able to be promoted to the investigator position. Did that for about 7 years.
And what does that mean, investigator? Like, what were you investigating?
Sure. So in Cedar Rapids, people would file a complaint of discrimination. My very first case, for example, was a woman who worked at a company for several years, and she learned that she was not getting paid as much as her male counterparts. And all things being equal, the only difference was she was a woman. So we look at things like performance reviews, how long she was there, other mitigating factors, and there was nothing left. And so the Civil Rights Commission is a law enforcement agency, so we actually enforce civil rights. So we do have teeth where we can do settlement agreements. We take folks to court if they decide not to work with us. Part of that role is also mediation. So I'm hoping, let's bring people together so we can co-create that solution.
Mm-hmm.
But there's many cases over the years. Towards the end of my time at the commission, over the last several years, we noticed a pretty big increase in the numbers of complaints being filed.
Wow.
And so it was employment and housing were the biggest areas for like disability or gender or race and LGBT. And then we also were seeing increased actual evidence of civil rights allegations being correct, being true. And so not only were there more cases, there were more evidence of it happening.
Wow.
And so I think I'm expecting that to continue. And that seems to be the trend based upon what's going on. And it's not just Iowa, it was nationwide.
Nationally.
Yeah.
Nationwide, the EEOC had, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission had to increase, and housing, urban development had to increase. And I think we're going to see that trend, unfortunately, for a while.
Yeah.
Okay, I gotta go back to the woman who you investigated.
Yes.
Did you help her get equal pay to her male counterpart?
Did.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
They gave her 5 years of back pay plus
Amazing.
additional training, and then also a promotion.
Wow.
Yeah. And at the same time, she was working at the same place during the investigation, which can be very challenging.
Oh,
Sure.
yeah.
A lot of pushback, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. But
that has to be, those things, those cases had to be so gratifying for you to really clearly see that your actions and your work was making a benefit in someone who had been,
I had to make a sunshine folder. Or things like that.
Where, like, you could look at on the dark days.
Yes. Because sadly, there were not always those days where it was a good day. And so it was like, oh, yes. Okay.
Remember this case.
I remember this case.
Yeah.
Or like we would go talk to kids in schools a lot, and they'd like draw us little cards and draw us pictures. And that was my favorite.
Yeah.
And would you say that children who just seem to be naturally more open than adults could really embrace the concepts of human rights in a different way than the adult who's been so socialized or shut down or jaded, cynical. Yeah.
Absolutely. And in my opinion, women's voices are often not heard. And when I go to do a presentation, it's always interesting to me who asks questions.
You're now encouraging question asking.
Yes. And so I'm like, please ask questions. What questions do you have? But yes, absolutely. Kids, and we framed it in a arena of like making people feel welcome, making people feel cared for. And the adults, I like adults too, don't get me wrong. Kids,
some days.
Fun.
Yeah. Especially,
some days. Yeah. And sometimes the adults were looking more for loopholes of how to get around
How to get around it. Yeah. Yeah.
instead of just embracing the fact that we should just
Be good to
be good
each
to
other.
each other,
Kind.
and
Yeah.
recognize the humanity.
So from all these years, like, me and my psychological mind, I'm like, I just want to ask her all these questions. What do you think it is about, and let's just talk about adults, that wouldn't be on board with human rights, right?
Yeah.
Everyone should have a fair shake. Everyone should have, they should be accepted. And,
Yeah.
what do you think is at the core, like the root of
Yeah.
why we discriminate and why we
Yeah.
push people aside and pretend they're not human?
Yeah.
What do you think it
absolutely.
is?
I think it's fear.
It's fear.
I think it's fear
Yeah.
of losing power, of changing the status quo where my friends tease me. I'm kind of like smash the patriarchy kind of person.
Good.
We are
We
too.
are too.
We are too. Welcome. We're all in the right space.
Company.
Yeah, you are.
And so the patriarchal society has
Good for
taught
everybody.
us how to behave.
Yep.
And yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Fear.
Mhm.
I know they always say, right? It's fear or love.
Mhm.
You can almost
Yeah.
walk through the world and
Right.
and see where there's fear and where there's love. And
I know.
I think when we're young, love is
It's
in
who we
us.
are. Well, yeah. It just
Yes.
exudes.
Yes.
Yes. The little kids, right? It
Yes.
just
Yeah.
comes, exudes.
And then
Yeah.
over time, it just gets kind of smushed down.
Yeah.
And
You know,
experiences and
Yeah.
traumas that aren't
Mhm.
processed, things that,
Right.
And I think I don't know if you'd agree with this. There seems to be this point where scarcity takes over and there may not be enough for everyone.
Right.
And so people grab on,
Oh, absolutely.
and that's where that power,
Yes.
of more and getting mine.
Mhm.
And we can't possibly both have it. So
Right.
it should be mine.
Yeah. What it's that saying? Human rights aren't pie. Isn't a pie. Everybody can have a piece.
There's plenty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I always my allegory that I used to use is more like you're spreading like light. Just because my light is lighting your candle, I'm not losing anything.
Yeah.
But when people see other people get rights, they assume
They've
that their
lost.
rights. Yes.
Yeah.
And so they just become more attached to their salient identities and then start to other people.
Mhm.
And so people who are othered or different, they're scary, they're problem, they're causing issues. They certainly couldn't have a good addition to our society. And so I did see that quite a bit in my conversations with people who were discriminating or who did not want to follow laws just in general. I would go to give a presentation, and I'll never forget this one man. He just did a walk by and he said, well, I think being a bigot should be a protected class. And he just kept walking. And I was like,
think being a bigot should be a
Yes.
protected class.
Yeah. I was like, no, that's not a thing.
Wow.
But I just thought it was interesting that he just said it and didn't want to actually engage in
No,
a conversation.
kept walking.
I
Yeah.
was like, you just wanted to drop that and roll.
Yeah.
rather than
Drop that
actually-
bomb.
I
And
was like, that was not very courageous, in my opinion.
yeah.
I'm like, I'm happy to have a conversation with you.
Yeah.
So it's that was a little bit funny, not funny.
Yeah.
Way. In civil
Mhm.
rights, you kind of start getting a morbid humor once in a while.
You probably have to in
it's
some
right.
ways.
You do, because sometimes you're like, that is not real.
Yeah.
That's not real.
Yeah.
But,
And I feel like I really want to take this into our current culture because we elected someone.
Mhm.
And since that has happened, we've started to see all kinds of things being
Yeah.
pulled.
Right.
And, I'm
Permission
even thinking
granted.
about about our state of Iowa, which was one of the first states to allow for gay marriage.
Right.
And now we're all sitting on the cusp of like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to
Right.
women's rights? What's going to happen to LGBTQ rights?
Yeah.
Okay, so talk us through
Yeah.
what you're seeing, what we need to understand,
Right.
and then how we can advocate.
Right. That's such a good question. And it's such a big question. I think what we're seeing right now, again, is going back to that scarcity mindset, like you said, and the fear, but it's been emboldened by policymakers, by people who are in the higher office. And, that happened the first time around. And so we saw the repercussions of that. We're seeing judges being put into place who will rule a certain way. And so, for example, like the ACLU or civil rights agencies have to be somewhat strategic in what cases they bring forward. Because if they bring forward a case, no matter how great it is, and they lose, they're setting a precedence that can be so damaging.
Yeah.
And so it's awful how strategic you have to be, and then you have to find who's being the most harmed right now.
Right.
And you have to work to help that person or that group. But I think it's going to continue. We've seen, for example, just this last few months ago, they removed gender identity as a protected class in Iowa, first state.
First
Ever
state.
remove.
First state. I didn't
right.
know.
Right.
Yes.
And I find it fascinating how they do it in defense of women. And that is just such a backwards way to remove somebody's rights. And then you even look at like who's being impacted. It's such a small group of individuals. Are they really causing harm?
Right.
No, they're truly not.
Yeah.
Last legislative season, I was at the Capitol several times speaking to legislators, testifying, and it was a little bit frustrating because I jokingly call it the ROI on DEI, the business case.
Yeah, which there is.
It absolutely there is. And I'm like, if I cannot get through to you on the morality side, on the ethical side, on the humanity side, then let's look at numbers. Let's look at
profits.
You're smart.
Money.
I
right,
love that.
Yeah.
competitive advantage,
Yeah.
but they're voting against their best interest in my mind because businesses are saying, please don't do this. We're going to lose people. And we're seeing people leaving. As for advocating, as for working in this arena, there's many organizations here locally. I'm very excited. I was just asked to be on the Advocates for Social Justice board in Cedar Rapids, and I said yes. And they've been around. They started with the inception after George Floyd was murdered. And so I joined them, and we're also in the process of putting together a liberation and freedom or Liberation and Justice Coalition in Cedar Rapids in this area. Basically, it's all these organizations are doing these amazing things. How can we coordinate and how can we collaborate and how can we care for one another?
Yeah.
Because I read, I think it was Audre Lorde, she said, rest is resistance.
Yeah.
And that's so powerful because in my arena, people don't rest because they feel like
and they burn out.
Keep going.
Yeah, because there's so much work to do.
Yeah. And so we're in the very beginning stages of getting that going because we need to be coordinated. Right now, it's like herding cats. Yeah. There's a lot of passion, a lot of talent, amazing people, but let's all get on the same page. Yeah. So we're not duplicating efforts and we're not leaving people out and everybody has a voice. And so that's one thing that I'm involved with in the very beginning stages. But
yeah, it does take, it's going to take strategy, like you said, both in the judiciary and then with legislators, with communities. You have to have strategy,
right?
Which normally in our nonprofits, right, they're doing really good things, and they're caring for people and taking care of people, but strategy is kind of an afterthought, right? And now it's become critical.
Absolutely.
And so having people like you to help create that and bring people together, that's where the strength comes in. And like you said, that's where it allows people time to rest.
Right.
You take up this piece, we'll work over here, and just working smarter.
Right. And that was a big part of the conversation as well, because everybody in the room with me, they've been in this arena for a long time and some were just tired.
They're tired.
Yeah. And it's sometimes hard to believe this is where we're at.
It is.
Right? Yeah.
It is.
The backsliding.
Yeah. It's like, I can't believe that I had more rights than my children.
Yeah.
And that just seems so antithetical to anything I ever thought would happen.
Yeah.
I know.
It's just unbelievable.
Agreed. Today's episode is brought to you by Dr. Yoga Mama, which is all the many offerings I have blending psychological science with the ancient wisdom of yoga and mindfulness. Join me for a yoga class, a meditation weekend, an online course, Wisdom Wednesday, which is the first Wednesday of every month, or maybe even an international retreat like Greece in the fall of 2025. By providing spaces and experiences for people to look inward, it is my great honor to watch people become the change they wish to see in the world.
This podcast is being sponsored by Kate Moreland Coaching. As a transformational coach and an advocate for authenticity and well-being, I work to support individuals and organizations navigating challenging times. Whether you are an individual, a leader, or an organization, your creative power lies in your authenticity. Doing the work to understand your strengths and acknowledge the patterns and rocks that are in your way is the path to well-being. Whether it's your career or your relationship with yourself or others, transformational change begins within. To learn more, reach out to me at katemorelandcoaching.com.
So I have a very practical question. So I had a trans person in a yoga class, and we were talking for a fair amount of time afterwards, and they were telling me that they are really considering leaving Iowa. It's not a safe state anymore. They're thinking about where else they can go. And then they were telling me about a lot of people in their generation, which would be the 20-somethings,
Right.
that are all really smart, socially conscious, young people that are all like, we got to leave.
Yes.
We got to leave. We're going to
Right.
Minnesota. We're going out
Illinois.
west,
Yeah.
but we can't stay here. And it just breaks my heart so much.
Right.
Again, what can we do to advocate to, what are the steps? Because, I love this person, right? And I'm like, wow, okay, what,
It is.
we're going to lose so much
We
beautiful
are.
diversity and artistry and consciousness and
brain
strength
power.
and brain
Right.
power.
Yes.
If things sort of stay or get
Right.
worse.
I completely agree. And a lot of the people in my arena are also like, I'm out of here.
Yeah, I
mean,
know,
I'm not
right?
safe. My children aren't safe. My brother, my sister, whomever isn't safe. And I will be the first to say my brother and his wife to live in Cairo, and they have Egypt for about 13 years, but they're moving back, and he and his wife are both teachers. And I said, as much as I love you, don't come here. Don't live in Iowa. And it hurts my soul to say that because I love him and my nephews and niece, but I cannot in good conscience say as an educator, you'll be safe here.
Yeah.
Because they're also very socially conscious and loving and see the humanity. But it goes back to, sometimes it's like, okay, what can I control? What's in my locus of control? Because otherwise, it's so easy to start spiraling.
Yeah.
Like I cannot control certain things. One thing I do recommend is, contact legislators ahead of the season. People like don't want to not make those relationships until they have a bill.
Right.
And they're like, don't do this. I don't like it. And it's good to start in like November, December, start talking to them, letting them know your thoughts on potential issues. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean they're going to vote a certain way
Right.
at all. And so that goes back to what can you do in your own circle? And so in my own circle of people, I work really hard to make sure they know I love them and they know that I'm here for them. And even strangers, I have been known to hug strangers randomly because I'm like, you look like you need a hug. Can I hug you? And they're like, yeah. My kids think it's funny, but.
Well, you really embody like being the change you want to see in the world. What you just said, it's like we do have the power to do that.
Right.
Right.
We have the power to
In our
be
own
love.
circles.
Yes.
To act with love.
Accepting,
And
compassionate.
that's the change we want to see. And so that feels very feminine too.
Yeah.
The compassion and the being creative in how you approach this and all those things that are the power of the feminine energy.
Right.
And I've been thinking a lot about how do, you're someone who's sat in this position of power and being able to see firsthand and just today learning from you. I think we need to keep learning from each other.
Oh, absolutely.
On how we can come together. And it may be in untraditional ways. It may be in what feel like small ways, but they add up when we're all moving in that same direction. And that energy starts to be the energy that's growing.
Yes.
And it's counter energy to what is percolating right now. So That's what I'm looking forward to.
I agree.
That momentum.
Yeah. We need to be visible in our support. There's a lot of people who will say behind closed doors that they support civil rights, that they support LGBT, that they support this, but they don't say it out loud.
Publicly.
And if they do say it publicly, people might push back. I'm like, well, that's called courage. And Dr. King said the time is always right to do what is right. Doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean you're not going to have issues happen. I mean, like I said, it's not easy. And there's been times working in civil rights where I had very challenging situations. And let's just say it's a good thing I have a very good poker face. But it just comes down to doing the right thing and not just doing things right. You know, you need to do the right thing. So, for example, an easy one that I like to tell people, which does take courage, if you hear somebody say something that is not appropriate, it's okay to say something to them.
Call it out.
Yeah, you don't have to do it right then. You can say, hey, you know, during this meeting, you said such and such. You know, for example, I was in a meeting a couple years ago, and I was giving a presentation to some landlords just about fair housing. And a lady asked about when Hy-Vee was open on First Avenue. And she referred to it as something that wasn't very kind. And I had heard that way of referring to it before. And so afterwards, I said, I appreciate you asking that question, but I think we need to reframe how we're talking about that neighborhood and how we're talking about that store. That could be very hurtful to people. And she was like, I didn't even realize that. That's just what we call it. And so, I mean, a lot of people just is a little bit of ignorance, or is just so outside of their experience that there's blinders on. And so sometimes you have to kind of open those up.
Yeah. And I love how you did it. You didn't do it in a shameful way.
Right.
And you didn't do it in a public way in front of a bunch of people. Like you said it on the side. And I actually have really appreciated that. Even when I have made a mistake by saying she or him, and it's a they, and then being corrected, and I'm always like, thank you, thank you. I'm trying to get better at this. I'm an advocate. I want to support, and so that kind correction without judgment, it really is powerful.
I think so too, and it takes restraint, you know, because sometimes
you want to say it in the moment.
I do, or they say something just so awful. Your visceral response is just like, I cannot believe you just said that. But I cannot, and I refuse to respond in a reactionary way. For right or for wrong, you know, if you work in civil rights, then you represent all civil rights. And as women, sometimes you represent all women. And you see that in all marginalized populations where you are the one sole representative, which is so not true. And we're all different humans. But it took, when I first started the Civil Rights Commission, my very first performance review, my boss said to me, you wear your heart on your sleeve. And I was like, oh, yep, I do. I absolutely do. And so I appreciated that feedback. It was so powerful and so helpful. And so I worked to not, I mean, I still feel it. I'm still passionate. I'm still caring and loving, but my response is a little bit more measured. I think
you respond instead of react.
Yes. Yeah. And it's served me well over the years, because I've noticed when you respond in kind, or you respond diplomatically or with grace, people will continue the conversation.
They will hear you and listen to you. If you come, and I wanted to ask you about that, about anger. I want to ask you about anger, because anger can be such a part of social activism. And I've been approached by people that anger is what's fueling their social activism, and it shuts me down, right? It's like, so can you talk about that? Of course, anger is going to be a natural part of it. And anger is not bad. It's not a bad emotion, but like how to, if you're leading always with anger, you may not make as much impact.
Absolutely. Because I know I tend to shut down if someone's coming at me hard.
Yeah.
I mean, professionally, I'm like, this is what it is. But my personal life, if you come at me hot, I'd be like, okay, we're done. There are different roles when it comes to advocacy. Some people are like the activators, the agitators, or they do arrestable offenses. They call them as like civil disobedience. And there is a space for that. I am not in that space, and that is not my area of wanting to be. But I recognize that. I'm like, that's where you are right now.
That's a role. Okay, that helps me to know that there are agitators, and that's a useful role.
Yeah, but that being said, though, we still have to be careful. I'm a big believer in time and place, and your audience. If they're not going to be open to you coming at them like that, I'm not sure how much it really helps.
The cause.
Absolutely. And when you start saying things out of anger, don't get me wrong, I've been angry too. And don't get me wrong, it can be used for fuel. But for me personally, when I react out of anger, I'm using my old brain. And I'm not going to be as rational. I'm not going to be as logical. I'm not going to be able to clearly articulate what it is that I need to say. And so for me, I have to take a step back. For some people, that's just what they need to get out. That's where they are in their journey. Perhaps they're going through their own grieving process. They're
wounded themselves.
Yes. And so they're reacting out of that wound. And some people are educators, or they're uplifters, or they donate money, or whatever it is. Everybody has a role in advocacy, I think.
I love that. Can you say that again? Everyone has a role.
Everyone has a role. Absolutely.
And we don't have to all be the agitators. Some of us are the contributors. Some of us are the lovers. Some of us are the educators.
Right.
That's powerful.
That is powerful.
Because sometimes I think of social advocacy, and I do see it as the angry picketer, and I'm like, oh, that just doesn't match with my persona, who I am.
Yes.
But there's all these other ways to make a difference that don't include yelling.
Right.
Yeah.
And I had my kids go with me to different events that were related to social justice, and there were some people who were angry and yelling, and I'm like, I understand.
Yeah.
I completely
that has
understand.
its place too.
It does. It does. I am not going to respond in that way. I'm not going to respond even though sometimes the policymakers might demean a certain population, I am not going to return in kind. I don't believe in striking down anybody.
Right.
For me, that doesn't work. Some other people prefer to do that. I don't think it's helpful, and I think it shuts down the conversation from any board events. So.
Yeah. Well, and you're modeling a different way of having civil discourse and being able to, and you probably had years, obviously, to practice that skill. And I think for young people especially, right, that are angry and feel unseen and unheard, sometimes it comes with experience too. And and so we're living in times where everyone is trying to figure out, where do I fit into this and how do I show up?
Right.
How am I an ally? How do I teach my children during these times? There's so much happening right now that I think it's good for all of us to examine what our role is and where maybe we can step up more.
Right.
And what our children are seeing. I keep thinking back to your early story of going to school in kind of two different environments, right?
Right.
And the how you can also navigate different environments now,
right?
Because but you also, as a child, I feel like you really learned how to see everyone.
Yeah, that was important to me.
Yeah.
In first grade, made a group for the Everyone Club.
Group for everyone.
Not the J Club.
No.
Everyone Club.
Everybody.
Yeah. So
that is like your
that story just sums it all up, Stephanie.
It really does.
What about your kids? Because I love that you just said, I take my kids to these events. And what do you think it's been like? I know you can't put yourself exactly in their shoes, but to have a mom who's been doing this kind of work, like how do you think it's impacted them?
I think honestly, probably good and bad. Just because some of the time when I was at civil rights, and that's one of the reasons I ended up moving away, was the civil rights director, Stefanie was blurred with mom. Stefanie was blurred with anything outside. And so, and since I'm so passionate about it, I would talk about it. And I had to be careful to not only talk about this. That being said, I've also seen my children, they're both very fairness and justice oriented. They think people should be treated a certain way through humanity, and they both will stand up and say something. And that brings me so much pride and joy, knowing that they have felt empowered to say things and to protect others. Because growing up, especially in the environment I was in, if you use your voice, you were in trouble, or you talk too much, or you were too much. And it's
and in a patriarchal culture, women are taught to not have a voice.
Be good girls.
So,
be quiet.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes. Stop asking questions. Just have faith. Yeah. But that's really allowed them to, I think, expand in their own roles too. Jules is going to school to be a therapist, studying social work and psychology, and just seeing her interest in this arena just warms my heart, and seeing Allie, she's involved with like yoga and, that side of things. And so just seeing them both putting their passions into their day-to-day, because I didn't always feel empowered growing up. And so I don't know why, but I was always relatively stubborn, so I did it anyway. For right or for wrong.
You have an inner compass, I feel like, that you've always had. That's really strong and guided you, it sounds like. Like you, even if, we talk a lot about kind of growing up in religious families too. And like, there was something inner voice that was like, this feels like, I know you're saying this, but I don't feel this in me.
It does not resonate with me.
I remember wanting to be like my confirmation name. I wanted to be Joan of Arc.
Oh, I love it.
Burn it down.
Instead of Catherine, you wanted to be Joan of Arc.
You could pick a saint's name.
Hilarious.
I love that so much.
And everyone was
you
like,
were.
no, you can't do that. And I was like, why not?
That makes sense to me.
So, I think, we had in our generation, we could push back a little bit, but I feel hopefully our kids have ability to use their voice in a much greater way than even we could, for sure.
And I think the youth are amazing. And I've said this for years. It's like they say they're the leaders of tomorrow. I'm like, no, they're the leaders now. Right now. We need to listen to them. And
they're the ones we need.
Yes.
To hear from.
Yes, exactly. And it's, I'm always so excited when I see a youth person moving something forward. Like in the group I'm involved in Cedar Rapids, there's several people who are younger, and it just warms my heart. It's an interesting feeling though, because it also makes me sad because they have to be involved in these things. I wish we didn't live in a world in which that was necessary.
Yeah, that they had to put their time and effort towards this. And
It's kind of basic human rights.
Yeah, basic
like things that we maybe for years took for granted are suddenly slipping away. And they're grabbing on and saying, this isn't okay. Yeah.
So I would like to know where your focus is now, because you've left HRC and you're doing some work individually, and I would love for you to tell our guest about what now.
Yes. So I just recently started. It's called the Spark Movement, but it's more of because I know as a woman, I never had a good mentor experience or a coaching experience. There was just some interesting characters who wanted to mentor me, and it did not. It was men, and that did not go well.
I just have to pause. There were some interesting characters, men.
Really wanted to mentor me. Yeah.
Mentor me. And
it didn't go so well.
It didn't go well.
Yeah.
For a variety of reasons. And I've just seen over the years of through seeing the things my children have gone through, seeing what I've gone through, seeing some of my family has gone through, we need to lift each other up. We need to make sure they have a voice, that they know how to use their voice. They feel comfortable using their voice, and remember their voice matters. So a big part of that is also mindfulness and meditation. It's really funny. I didn't realize this until decades later, but apparently I meditated as a kid. Did not know that. But I remember just sitting on the floor and just like looking at a candle. And my therapist, I told her about it a while ago, and she's like, "You were meditating." I was like, "Oh, I guess so."
Wow.
But just, getting out of our heads, I
Yeah.
think. I tend to live up in here.
Most of us do.
Well, it's interesting. I'm 50 now. At the age of 49, I finally was diagnosed with ADHD. And a lot of things made a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
So for so long, I just thought I was too much or not enough or so flighty or just, the queen of chaos. If I didn't have chaos, I was going to make it. And so for me, that mindfulness and that meditation or time in nature really helps me just to slow down, and it allows me to be my best self.
Yeah.
And it also, I like to encourage women to seek to help themselves first.
Yeah.
We're so taught
To give,
Yes,
give,
yes,
burn out.
yes,
Right?
exactly. And someone else was like, "Well, joy is also resistance." I'm like, "Yeah, it is. It is." And so, just bringing women back to who they are. 'Cause
Rest and joy, two things that women often
Rest, joy, and hope, right?
Yes.
Exactly,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, because we all have the inner light. So how do
We
we
do.
illuminate that for
Yep.
others?
Yep.
Like I've always said, I'm like, I want you to see the beauty that I see in you.
Yeah.
I mean, because there's just so much. And I say that to my kids. I'm like, there's so much in you.
Yes.
That is just beautiful. And I'm not talking about physical appearance. I'm talking about who you are as a
Gifts,
human.
your
your
inherent
values.
talents. Yeah.
So how do we connect with that again?
And I think it's especially key for women because of the fact that we have literally been raised in patriarchal culture, which has
yes,
subconsciously convinced all of us that we aren't as good.
right.
Right.
Absolutely.
So there's not enough.
And there's not enough.
Yes.
And so we have to work harder and we have to be a perfectionist.
Right.
And so I think there's a whole lot of healing for we women. And I think women are the ones who are going to help heal this broken culture. And so
rebuild
it.
I mean, there's so much. So I love evidence-based studies. I read that stuff, and there's so much evidence. I know. I love it. I love it. Give me a neuroscience article.
Science geeks.
Oh, I love it.
Me
But
too.
there's so much evidence showing that when women are in leadership, the society and the company do better.
Yep.
And it's fascinating to me that
we even have data. We even have data. Why isn't it?
Yeah, it goes back to that, status, power, and control dynamic where, and there's just privilege that people need to recognize. And I mean, I have privilege, and I need to recognize that in different spaces, and there's different kinds, and using that.
Yeah.
Right. Where can we use our privilege even as women?
Right.
Right. For women that, have added levels of barriers.
Right. All the intersectionality. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it feels like you've moved into a realm where you can be more authentic.
Yes.
Would that be true?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's, I grieved for a while because I felt like, because I was there for so long. And then I also knew the storm that was going to be coming, and so I had a lot of guilt. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm leaving right now. And so that was really hard.
Yeah.
But now I'm realizing I'm able to give more of me and where I want to be. Like I'm still on civil rights commissions or councils. I'm still volunteering. I'm still volunteering as a sexual assault advocate. And I'm doing that on my time. And I don't have to be because as you can imagine, working in government, you have to be very, very, very diplomatic. Not that I'm not diplomatic, but there are just certain things I couldn't do.
Yeah.
You can get into more good trouble now.
Yes, I can.
That's a good way to say it.
I love it. Yes.
And I think there's something to be said for all of us need to be able to get our cups refueled. And if we're in situations or jobs that don't allow that, then are we really good for anyone?
Right.
So I think that, again, it's the idea we all have something to give, but if we're exhausted and burned out, we can't give our God-given talents to the world. So it is really figuring out where can I be in a way that I'm full, so that I have a lot to give.
And part of that is we often don't listen to our own inner knowing.
Speaking our language.
I mean, it's just true because, I mean, I tend to be, I want to overthink things. I always, let me overthink that. I'm not very logical, rational. My partner is like, okay, you don't have to have evidence for everything. I'm like, but you do. And so working on the faith aspect, but, you know, just understanding that.
Yeah. Tapping into that inner knowing, which we talk to a lot of women in midlife. That is the time when you're like, if not
really
now, when?
Yeah, exactly.
And I know it was freeing when I hit 50. I was like, oh,
50's magical.
I love 50. Honestly, when I turned 40, I'm like, I'm almost 50 because I was just excited to say it.
Yeah.
But I am definitely much more open and understanding to listen to my authentic inner self and to speak my truth and encouraging others to speak their truth. As you can imagine, being a sexual assault advocate. So what happens is I'm on call, and if someone is assaulted, they're at the hospital, and I go with them. And I'm with them during the examination, the conversations with the police. And my job, my sole job, is to make them feel cared for and to advocate for them and to tell them their rights. I'm not there to tell them what to do. I'm not there to tell them what not to do. I'm there to provide them with resources and listen. And just telling someone, I believe you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry this happened to you is so powerful because there's so many times where we're not believed, we're not listened to, or they want to say, well, you did this, so this happened.
Right.
Very victim shaming.
Yep.
And so I think it's so important in our own personal lives. I'm not saying everybody go be a sexual assault advocate, but if you can do, but in our own lives, if you see people who are hurting, give them grace, give them love, you know? And sometimes, you know, I always tell my kids when they were younger, because they would say, oh, so-and-so was so mean today. And I'm like, I'm sorry that happened, but perhaps something at home. Maybe they had a really rough day.
Oh my gosh, I say that to my children all the time. And then they counter back at me. Will you just be on my side for once? Yes, I'm always like, well, maybe they have a hard home life, or
exactly. I know, Mom. Can you
Mom,
just
can you be on my side?
say they are a jerk? But yeah, it's I don't know. And there's so many times, and that serves me well too, where if I see someone reacting to me, to not take it personally.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because
there's a lot of freedom that comes in that when you realize,
Yes.
it's not about me.
Exactly.
Almost all of the time, it's not about me.
Right.
Exactly.
And teaching our children younger can save them and also create more empathetic, you know, humans that are out there understanding that, you know, everyone is having an experience we may not know anything about that is affecting their behavior.
Yeah.
And I love how Brene Brown talks about empathy because people say, oh, I'm just not empathetic. I wasn't born that way. And I like how she describes it as like, this is a verb.
Yeah.
It's not a noun.
It's an action.
These are actions you can take.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, there might be more people who are comfortable with that, but everybody has the ability to perform in a way to the perspective taking, to the care. It's an action. So when someone says, well, I'm not empathetic, I'm like, well, let's work on this.
Yeah.
Let me give
We
you some
can train
tools.
you in on that.
We can do that together.
We can do that.
We can do that.
You are a light.
Yeah.
And I love that you've had
In really dark places too.
You're bringing light to very dark places and have for many years. I'm struck as a recovering lawyer. First of all, you made the right decision. And secondly, you've had this career in justice, just in a more unusual path or more authentic really path for yourself. And
Thank you.
And so, and you continue to do things in your own way that feel authentic to you. And I think that's really brave. I think it's a lesson for all women. It's never too late to pivot and to use your skills in a new way that just feels more true to you and where you can make a bigger impact. And I, like Betsy said, I think it's time for women to take a deep look at that. Am I aligned?
Yes.
Am I using my gifts fully?
Right.
What may I need to brave step may I need
And
to take?
even in the midst of using my skills, am I able to experience hope and joy and fun and pleasure and peace? Because if we're just in the trenches and our life is miserable, I feel like that's also missing the mark.
Yes.
Right? If we're in the trenches doing the hard work, but we're miserable, that like, that's
Yeah.
There needs to be
That's
that hope. And
exactly.
there has to be a
Exactly.
space for that.
Yeah.
And you've made space for that for
Mhm.
yourself. It
Thank
sounds
you.
like.
That's very kind.
Yeah.
So we end, Stephanie, with the same question of everyone. And you clearly are a wild woman ever since first grade when you announced, I'm making a club for everyone. Not in this pushing people away.
Yeah.
So we ask Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who wrote the seminal book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. Have you read that one? Yeah.
So good.
She talks about there are 4 precious doors into the life of the wild woman.
If you have a deep scar, that is a door. If you have an old story, that is a door. If you love the sky and the water so much you can almost not bear it, that is a door. And if you yearn for a deeper life, a full life, a sane life, that is a door.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So is there one of those doors that rings most true for you?
That's hard because all 4.
You can take all
It's
4.
all 4.
Yeah, because 1, 3, and 4.
Okay.
But, because like I said, there were traumatic things that I went through growing up that allowed me to be resilient and to perhaps understand people's perspective. And then the deep love of nature and water. Like if I am not in nature, you probably don't want to be around me. Okay, because it makes me a little cranky.
Yeah.
But just getting my face out in the sun and just connecting with nature is just so powerful and just fills my cup so much. And I'm always, for right or for wrong, I keep saying that, but for right or for wrong, I'm always looking for something more that I can do. I'm very achievement oriented, which I'd be careful about that, but I'm like, what am I here to do? And am I fully doing what I'm here to do?
Yeah.
Am I aligned with that? Am I fulfilling my purpose? What legacy am I going to leave when I'm gone? Basically, I just want a legacy of love, that people feel loved.
I think you're doing it.
I do too.
I think you're doing
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Really.
Thank you for this time and
my
for educating us and educating all of our listeners today. It's such an important topic.
Well, thank you so much. It was such an honor being here with you 2 amazing women. And also the woman who came before on your podcast. I'm honored to be here.
Well,
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us today. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. Come back and rewild with us again next week.